Ah, the 90s. They were a big time for psychological horror movies that delved into the deep and depressing world of serial killers, and Condemned, which was the launch title in 2005 with the Xbox 360 itself, was one of those titles that tried to latch onto that with its stylish, flashy visuals and disturbing descent into the mind of a killer. And it really doesn't hide its nod to Seven, David Fincher's masterpiece title of 10 years prior, in any way, shape or form. And just like that title, it's been on backwards compatibility for a very long time, but I decided to pull it out of my collection and give it a look to see just what it delivers on the Xbox One and the Xbox One X. First up, there is no enhancements here for the X. This is a standard 1280 by 720p resolution across all three versions, which you can see a visual comparison on screen. The only difference here is the gamma output and the improvements to the upscaler, which just makes them appear slightly sharper and crisper on the X and the S than the Xbox 360, which I've tried to correct here but not on all shots. So other than that, it's an identical visual package. But what was strange about the title at the time was it was fully V-synced, but it ran an unlocked frame rate. So we should see a significant improvement in performance, which we do, but it isn't entirely as you would expect. There's some strange elements of the engine incorporating the limitations here. But before we jump into that, it is an old title and it certainly looks its age. The quality of the UV mapping and the texture quality itself, and obviously the character models, are all very low polygon and they look very old now. And the Lithtech engine that powers this has very long heritage, running right back from the seminal Fear 2. With the engine starting life as a sale to Microsoft, who never picked it up for DirectX, and therefore they used it for all of their titles, which also powers right up to Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, although it's been significantly enhanced. Very much centred around the Unreal engines at the time, and it delivered on that impact with large hulking characters, very dark and gloomy atmosphere with lots of dynamic lighting and dynamic shadows, which Condemned uses very successfully here. When you're running around areas, it's very dark and gloomy with your torchlight and your gun, lots of flashes and shadows playing on the game, and that dark and gloomy image works incredibly well, but it does look and has aged quite significantly since those early days, even if the lighting is actually still quite good, with volumetric lights used here in this very early launch title, and again shadows, dynamic shadows quite often in the title, which is something that you still don't get as often as you should in modern titles. But we're really talking about the performance here. This is a fast look at these backwards compatibility titles, not an in-depth dive into the title itself, and performance wise it's a strange one. Like I say, the game ran an unlocked frame rate on the Xbox 360, which generally saw it jump up to highs of 45 or 44 at its highest point, and these were quite rare. Overall, it tended to spend the bulk of its time around that 30 FPS, 33 milliseconds time, but it did, obviously because it ran a double buffered VSync here. When it struggled, it would then drop down to locked 20 FPS sections running at 50 milliseconds. They've been completely eradicated here in backwards compatibility, now never dropping that low at any point, but it does hit the same ceiling of 45 FPS. Now, this is an odd one because they've obviously engineered the title itself with some kind of weird soft limit that limits the fact that it isn't stopping it from running 16 millisecond frame times, but it consistently runs over that to skip between 16 and 33 milliseconds, so it never breaks through that glass ceiling of 45 FPS. You can see here on the X, which has got significantly more power in every single aspect of the engine to push through that limit if it was able to, and it's not. It really operates around the same level as the Xbox One S. So you're getting no visual enhancements on any of these versions, aside the slightly cleaner and crisper image and the darker gamma output. Outside of that though, performance wise, they're both locked pretty much at a 45 FPS. Obviously there's dips and it is a little bit inconsistent to play. It certainly doesn't feel like a 60 FPS cap title, even playing in backwards compatibility, but it is more consistent and slightly smoother, so it is the better option to play this title over and above the standard 360 one. So if you do want to dive back in to some old school hack and slash and murder solving, then Condemned runs slightly better than it did on the 360, but it's hardly a revelation, and it does highlight, just again like I've said many times, you can't always say it's the hardware limitations. This is a good example of some kind of strange, I'm not even going to second guess because I have no idea what's going on with the engine, but it's certainly limited soft-wise to a 45 FPS maximum limit. So this consistency between 16 and 33 milliseconds, maybe a timing issue, is stopping it breaking through that level, what the hardware is clearly capable of exceeding. It's a shame, but it's still a better running version than that original, and that for free is something you can't really turn your nose up at. Anyway, I'm out. I'll catch you on the next one.
Thomas! and the path takes strange turns.
Police! Drop the weapon now!
Be ready for death, Agent Thomas. It shall come. Visit him again.